Welcome to Our Country, Our Voice. Really quick, I want to address something I saw in the comments on YouTube the other day. Just so you know, this is a podcast hosted by Our Country, Our Choice. So, yes, I do work with Colonel Douglas McGregor. No, I'm not riding his coattails. So understand that this is just another show. Not everything is Colonel McGregor. Want to make that clear right up front. As we get into this, we've still jockeyed around a few ideas for the name for this show. My producer had a name that he came up with yesterday, and I want to get your feedback. So if you would, let me know what you think about righteous indignation. That would take the place of Our Country, Our Voice. It's something that Andrew Breitbart said at one point. I think it was the name of his book. So do you have any thoughts on that? I don't know. We're still trying to get this thing locked into place with the voice and the intent of what we want it to be. But with that, we've got a pretty awesome show today. I have a friend of mine that I want to introduce to you. And before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about me. So those of you who know me know what we've been through in the last few years, both myself and who I'm going to introduce you to, Mark Bashaw. But we fought against tyrannical behavior from our own government and an unlawful order that was thrust upon all service members in the Department of Defense and the U.S. military. And it has had extremely powerful ramifications for the DOD as it stands now and for the future of the DOD. You know, something like 80% plus of service members that join do so because they have legacy in their family of military or military service. A lot of those members who were kicked out and even more are telling their family members, I don't want you to join, are dissuading others from joining, because as an organization, we can't serve the United States and defend the Constitution if we are violating the law, breaking order, or giving unlawful orders, violating constitutional rights of our service members. Eventually, that will bleed into violating constitutional rights of the citizenry at large. So we have to keep talking about this. We have to keep talking about what the Department of Defense did, because this affects you at the local community level. When you talk to your loved ones, your children, relatives, nieces, nephews, whoever, you need to understand what the Department of Defense has done, what they are doing about it, and how they've addressed it. And if you believe that is enough to suffice for the lack of accountability that is yet to take place. We have, up until now, nobody has been held to account for what was done. So with that, I want to bring in Mark Bashaw. I'll let you tell your story to them a little bit, tell about your military background, and then we'll talk about some of the things that are going on right now. So welcome.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, Sam. Good to see you. Mark Charles Bashaw, served 17 years active duty in the military, started out in the Air Force, enlisted back in 2006, served 10 years overseas, made it to the rank of Master Sergeant, worked entomological sciences, civil engineer units, some public health type activities. And then in 2019, I did a direct commission into the Medical Service Corps of the Army. I was directly commissioned 2019 September as a first lieutenant. They in the Medical Service Corps as a preventive medicine officer and specifically a medical entomologist. I was then sent as my first duty location, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Maryland, to the Army Public Health Center in January 2020. I served there as company commander. I served in the entomological science division doing risk communication strategies, and doing our best to try to protect service members from vector-borne disease. The pandemic kicked off in March of 2020. May 2020, I was selected to be a company commander, so I served for a full year. And then what we saw in, I call it the foreign belligerent installation of a executive, which was the Biden administration in January 2021, we started seeing the weaponization of unlawful orders, and weaponization of mandates, the COVID-19 mandates, the masking, the testing, the jabs against service members. And then later in September, October 2021, we saw the weaponization of masking and testing against the quote unquote unvaccinated service members. I got a hold of the risk communication strategies that was going out to the force, Department of Defense, from Army Public Health Center. And it was pure propaganda. And I started communicating with them like, hey, we've got the VAERS database, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting database, the government's own database that shows these immense signals. By 2021, September 2021, these signals were huge. They were undeniable. And when I saw the risk communication strategy was straight up propaganda, I was like, we got to warn service members here about the effects of these possible effects of these injections that they're, that at this point in time was being forced upon them, coerced upon them, manipulated, and all that. So the target got put on my back. I was targeted. I was sent to. Because I refused to participate with these unlawful orders, the injections, the masking, the testing for COVID-19. I was banned from all Army Public Health Center facilities for 413 days. I was charged with failure to obey a lawful order, Article 92. I was sent to a court-martial. I was called an insider threat. I was threatened with Leavenworth imprisonment. I was escorted to behavioral health, weaponized behavioral health appointments. I was found guilty in a court-martial, but given no punishment in a court-martial. Hint, hint, the judge knew I was a protected communicator, and he punted the football to the commanding general. Commanding general weaponized the conviction against me, and in June of 2023, they successfully, unlawfully discharged me from the military. So that's a lot, but that's my background.
Whew. All right. That's a lot. Mark, I'm going to be silly for the sake of theater here for a minute and play devil's advocate. Mark, you are a soldier in the United States Army. Your job is to follow orders. You have gotten all the other vaccines, all the other injections. Why didn't you follow this order? What made this one unlawful?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And as service members, we are taught to assume that orders are lawful from our chain of command. But if you, as a service member, and this is codified in military doctrine, if you, as a service member, perceive that orders are unlawful, you have a duty to communicate with your chain of command properly. It's a two-way street, that chain of command, right? Some seem to think it's not, but it is. It's a two-way street. So, we had these EUA injections, and we all knew, especially in the medical field, emergency use authorized. Came out of the anthrax debacle, you must be given the option to accept or refuse, right? That not only includes the injections, that includes the masking and the testing. They were all emergency use authorized. Even on the boxes, those boxes for the testing and the mask, it specifically stated the federal law stating you have the option to accept or refuse. If you looked into that law and you saw U.S. Code 21-360 triple Bravo, where it specifically says you must be given the option to accept or refuse. Service members also, United States Title 10, 1107 Alpha, you must be given the option to accept or refuse these products. Why? Because they're experimental. And we knew this. We knew this from the onset of this whole pandemic, this whole psychological operation, and how they went about jamming these quote unquote solutions in there. We just need to get a vaccine and everything's going to be a-okay for a disease with a 0.02% death rate, or whatever it was, a 1% among service members. I think it was like a 0.09% death rate of service members. So yeah, it's not easy when you perceive unlawful orders, but you have a duty to communicate. And so that's what I was doing, filing Article 138, giving my chain of command the information to make the right choice. And you saw it. It was systemic across the board. My situation's not unique, really.
So you're telling me that the military and the government is not allowed to experiment on service members?
That's correct. That's correct.
Really?
And that's a long precedent. That's a long precedent from experimentation on service members. You know, we had the
Interesting.
LSD testing, all that stuff. So
Yeah, I wonder how family members would feel if they knew that they were sending their sons and daughters off to the military to serve their country dutifully and protect the Constitution, if they knew that their child, their son, their daughter was used as a human experiment for experimental drugs. I wonder how people would feel about that. Would that change your mind in the community about sending your children off to the military to potentially die, knowing that their own government is betraying them by not only breaking the law, but using them as a pharmacological experiment? I think it might change how I feel about things. So that's interesting. Okay.
I mean, you're absolutely right. It's all volunteer force. I mean, last time I checked, it's all volunteer force. These individuals like yourself, myself, we voluntarily raised our right hand. And the fact that as soon as you go into military service, basic training, what is the first thing they do? They start jabbing you with these medical products, experimentation, whatever you want to call it, injections, right? But where is the medical justification for it? Because
Correct.
to me, there is none, especially since we went through we just got done with a huge pandemic. Well, what happened to flu? Where'd flu go? Right. And now we're still requiring service members to annually be up to date on their flu shots because military readiness. Give me a break. It's not military readiness, because in order to be, readiness or military, you got to have some sort of justification. No, but what their justification is, you just follow orders, Sam. You just follow orders. You just do what you're told.
Right.
And listen, I'm all about following orders. I'm all about following orders. It's followed orders Well, I followed lawful orders for 17
Correct.
years. Lawful orders, 17 years. No problem following orders, right? But the unlawful ones, no. You have a duty to object to them. You have a duty to communicate with your chain of command. Army Doctrine 6-22 literally spells out how you defy unlawful orders. So it's not just me making this up. It's training. We've all been trained.
Yes. And it is our duty as officers to do so. And, this is something I bring to the attention of anybody watching this. The so what from all of this, because most people weren't affected by this because they didn't know this was taking place. And the military is such a small percentile of the US population. But the so what is this: we have a lot of progressive, communist, Marxist ideology that has infiltrated the ranks of the DoD. What happens when the service members are led to believe that the citizenry are their enemy and it is their duty to lock them up and detain them? We already saw this happening during the pandemic. We saw the National Guard out there roaming the streets, telling people to get back in their homes. This was a real thing. It is not far-fetched to say that the active duty could be mobilized on the streets of the United States and told that it is their duty to quarantine and detain any individual who is in violation of whatever martial law code comes out or whatever kind of, World Health Organization statute is put in place. And this is the real fear here. If you will not stand up against an unlawful order in a context like this, then you're not going to do it when somebody tells you to go round up your fellow American citizens as well. And this is important that people understand this. Mark, I want to jump into something else really quick. I want to jump into Eugene Vindman. Can you bring up my screen really quick? Tell me about this tweet right here.
Yeah, so Eugene Vindman, Colonel, retired Eugene Vindman, was the staff judge advocate at Aberdeen Proving Grounds after he got fired from Trump White House during the whole perfect call with President Zelensky and the quote-unquote whistleblowing, which he wasn't actually doing. He got fired from Trump White House. He went to serve and got promoted in Biden administration as the staff judge advocate, Aberdeen Proving Grounds. He was in direct receipt of my Article 138 showing the dangers, the specific and substantial dangers to public health and safety regarding these injections, the violations of emergency use authorization federal laws, the discrimination against the religiously convicted service members who were submitting religious accommodations, and the display of medical privacy information to the rest of the command. So he was in charge of all this. He got my Article 138. He charged me. He was the one that signed off on charges on 18 January against me, and then dismissed my Article 138 the following day, and then convicted me in a court martial. And this is him bragging publicly to the world how he secured the first conviction of a COVID mitigation measures, guilty on all 3 counts, which it was only 2 counts, but I digress.
Mark, weren't you a whistleblower by definition?
Yeah. By Army definition, any service member who submits violations of military regulation, violations of federal law, or specific and substantial dangers to public health and safety to their chain of command is a protected communicator. And I would argue there's a lot of service members who did that the last 5 years with the VAERS data, with the EUA laws, and with their religious accommodations as well. So yep, by definition, protected communicator. He had a duty to push that further up so we could cease and desist this weaponization of these injections upon our force.
You know what I find interesting here is the fact that Eugene Vindman cried from the rooftops about how his brother was retaliated against by the Trump administration in his first term for these alleged conversations that were said to be unlawful or illegal or whatever they were with I believe it was Zelensky, between Zelensky and Trump. And so he ran the gamut about how, Trump was retaliating against his brother, and this is tyranny, and this is criminal abuse, and all these other things. Yet he had the nerve to go on Twitter and brag about going after a first lieutenant who was doing his duty as a preventive medicine officer to protect the force. He bragged about court-martialing you, ruining your career, and taking you down. That is
and let's ask ourselves this question: where is he now? Where is he now?
Indeed, tell us.
Where is he now? I'll tell you where he's at. He's Virginia District 7 elected representative. He now sits on the House Armed Services Committee. That's who sits on the House Armed Services Committee.
That's something. So this is the guy that is making decisions for our military. And that article you posted on Twitter the other day was a little interesting. I think I can actually share that here. Let me see if I can get that up for everybody. That was, I don't want to slow this down, but yeah, here we go. Go ahead and share this slide. This is Representative Eugene Vindman, who was hit with an FEC complaint after his campaign promoted his twin brother's book. So rules for thee, but not for me, right?
Yeah.
He was going around on his campaign promoting his brother's book, which is against it's against campaign finance regulations. And we have seen this over and over and over with him. We've seen him capitalizing on his contracts in the Ukraine war and making a buck off his fellow countrymen. And for those of you who don't know, the Vindmans are Ukrainian themselves. So this is something they've capitalized on immensely over the last several years, the war in Ukraine with Russia, and making millions of dollars and using the war to enrich himself, attacking service members who are doing their due diligence and their job to protect the force, and then enriching himself more, enriching his brother, and helping promote his book from the campaign trail. It's staggering.
Yeah, I mean, sounds par for the course in what we saw the last 5 years. Par for the course.
I don't want to waste any more time on Eugene Vindman, but he is a real character. Eugene, if you see this, I want you to know you're a scumbag of a rare order, my friend. So I want to ask you, though, based on your time in the service, you said you spent 17 years in uniform. Based on your job as a preventive medicine officer, what what is your opinion of the current status and readiness of the force, the health of the force, and what do you see as the most alarming issue when it comes to the health of those in the uniform right now?
The problem is we think of military readiness all wrong in the military. When you talk about military readiness, it's almost like the first thing they go to is their med pros charts, and for the public, general public out there, your med pros or your health data, right? So it's basically green or red. And so they go down the line like, oh, you're not up to date on your vaccines. You don't have this, you don't have that. But it's like, again, that goes back to what I said earlier. None of that's being justified. There is no scientific justification for that, other than the fact that they've made it, quote unquote, a military readiness item and allowing service members not to conduct their official duties in locations in which we need to send them as a nation, because of the big pharma profits that are being taken from the Department of Defense. So there's this relationship between Department of Defense and big pharma, and it seems like they're maintaining that relationship, but there's no scientific justification for that relationship, because you're talking about the healthiest force, or should be the healthiest force on the planet, because prior to even getting into the military, you go through all that medical scrutiny, and a lot of people don't even make it that far. So the ones who do make it, they're incredibly healthy, or should be. And then we inject them with sort of a serum of concoctions as soon as we get them in the force, and we wonder why service members have these rare forms of issues popping up. Or better yet, when a service member is having issues, instead of treating that service member humanely, and I'm talking about mental health here, they shove them off to mental health treatment facilities. And what does mental health treatment facilities do? Well, they're immensely in bed with big pharma too. They are incentivized to throw pills, throw band-aids at these individuals, and that's exactly what they do. So they get them all hopped up on these psychotropics and then send them back to the unit, and we wonder why we have a suicide crisis. So you want to talk about military readiness and what the biggest threat to our force is? The biggest threat to our force is not treating your service members with dignity and humanity and pushing them off to medical, and then medical not properly doing and following their Hippocratic oath and using those treatment protocols as a last resort and not a first resort. And maybe you should just listen to the service member and their legitimate grievances they may have. But that's again, that's par for the course. Especially we've seen any service member, and you can attest to this, what happened when we started speaking up? The first thing they go to is, he's crazy, right? Because if they can discredit your mental cognitive ability, you do not have any credibility. And on top of that, if they can give you a diagnosis and get you eating those psychotropics, then you've lost all credibility in their eyes. And then we wonder why we have these issues. We wonder. So my message to the force, my message to Pete Hegseth, my message to RFK is, yeah, stop feeding psychotropics, SSRIs that induce suicidal ideations, ban them from even a protocol for service members, for our veterans, and the general public needs to look into that as well, as a whole. So I'm pretty passionate about that. I've seen way too many people take their lives because of these toxins that have been coerced upon them.
Sure. Hey, I want to explore that a little bit further. Tell me about this weaponization of behavioral health. What was taking place across the force over the last several years? You said these people were labeled as crazy who didn't want to take the vaccine or whatever. What did that actually look like on the ground in the formations?
Yeah. So what that looks like is, if you're animated in any sort of way, if you show any signs of quote unquote aggression, because you're upset because you're receiving these unlawful orders, they're blatantly and belligerently violating their own duties, right? Immediately they hone in on that attitude, right? They hone in on on like a case like Seth Ritter, Captain Seth Ritter, where he files legitimate complaints about his chain of command criminal activity. And then what did they do? Those agents, instead of working that case, call his command, and they'll weaponize a command referral behavioral health assessment, right? Because the commanders have that ability to do, right? I'm not saying it's lawful, because you still have to have justification, but oftentimes they just make up whatever they want. Oh, he's aggressive, he's angry. Well, yeah, of course he's angry, because you're violating the law. Of course he's upset.
Right.
You're violating the law. And then what do? Once they get you into that facility and you sign that documentation, they got you. And oftentimes in a prison type situation, because you're not getting out until you get cleared by a doctor. And some of these doctors have severe biases. They might find out what you were doing, and they have a cognitive bias towards what you're doing. And guess what? They continue to weaponize the situation. They ask you, and again, I keep on going back to Seth Ritter's case because it's the most publicly available story that's completely egregious and highlights this very well. They ask him, well, who do you believe the president is right now? Like, that's a behavioral assessment. That's a behavioral cognitive assessment question. You're going to ask them political questions, and then you're going to weaponize the answer against them, and then lock them down, and then give the doctor orders to forcibly inject him if he refuses the psychotropics that night. And by the grace of God, Commander Rob Green, Truth for Health Foundation, Dr. Vliet, David Wilson, who's attorney, basically, again, by the grace of God, saved him and secured his release from capture. And
literally
Sam,
saved him from being killed. And I want to say something really quick with Dr. Vliet. Dr. Vliet did her residency in the behavioral health unit in the emergency room. And when she saw the concoction that they were going to put into him that night, what they were going to put she flat out said, they are trying to kill him. They would have killed him with this concoction. They would have absolutely fried his brain. It was absolutely egregious what they did. They were trying. So like you said, walking down the path, they weaponized behavioral health against him. They asked him who he thought the president was, if he thought the 2020 election was stolen, asked him a lot of ridiculous questions that had nothing to do with his frame of mind or his current state of being. And then they forced him into the hospital where they were going to put him on, I believe it was, floor 9, which was the psych ward there at Benning. And they were going to kill him.
Yeah. And
this is crazy.
Think about all the soldiers who we don't know their stories. Think about all the unknown soldiers who actually died, right? Think about that. And I think about the tomb of the unknown soldier. That takes on a whole new meaning when you think about that, right? And those soldiers who really did stand up, who really had legitimate things going on and trying to communicate, do everything the military trained them to do, and disappeared, right? Disappeared. Oh, it was a suicide. Oh, it was, training, whatever the case is, right? But I equate what happened the last 5 years to a SEER level vent on the most complicated psychological level you could possibly imagine. And because when I went through, Air Force sent me to SEER training for a contingency operation. That SEER training was not applicable at that time for that contingency operation. There might have been small aspects of it, but where that training came in handy the most was the last 5 years at Army Public Health Center. Everything the adversary did to us in that training, we experienced from our own service members, from our own government, right? Every isolation, you name it, the whole gambit. And so
that is so sad.
It was legitimately survival and evasion after capture. That's legitimately what it was. And we did survive.
Command. Those who swore the same oath as you to protect and defend the Constitution were the violators of not only the oath they took, but the trust that was put in them as your leadership to take care of you and to make sure you were ready to defend this nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. They were the ones. They were the ones violating.
Think about how big this is. The Department of Defense and a lot of service members. Listen, they weren't able to purge everybody. There's still amazing service members in the
There are
military. I'm not saying that.
incredible men and women all over
Incredible,
the ranks.
all over the ranks, incredible service members. I love my brothers and sisters in uniforms. We have ones legitimately who violated the law that are still serving. But for the general public out there, let's think about this for a second. You have the largest government agency in the world, Department of Defense, just put down on paper in writing the order was unlawful. If it was unlawful for service members, what about the police officers? What about the school teachers? What about your firefighters? What about your state police? Right?
What
State
about
police
our pilots? Our pilots.
Pilots is a huge one. I'm in a lawsuit
Yes.
with Captain Cross against the FAA for refusing to investigate what they had an obligation to investigate. But at all these levels, it was unlawful, it was illegal, it was immoral, it checks every darn box there is for I mean, at this point, evil. I mean, it was completely evil.
Correct.
An absolute attack on our nation and an attack on humanity, if you want to take it that far.
So where do we go from here? We have, like you said, the Department of Defense just came out in a memorandum that was signed by the Secretary of Defense. He declared that it was unlawful as implemented. And this is where we need to be very clear. We've said this earlier in the podcast. You can read about this in multiple outlets, but it was unlawful as implemented. That means the Secretary of Defense stated in his, not the current Secretary of Defense, but Secretary of Defense Austin, who implemented the mandate, stated that an FDA approved drug would be the requirement for fulfilling this mandate. And yet an FDA approved drug was never provided to service members. So now that we know it was unlawful as implemented, where do we go from here? We know that Pete Hegseth has tried to, curry favor with those who were kicked out and try to get them to return. But I believe it's very few number of actual, service members who want to come back in. And those who do, what I've heard from the force is basically they just want to do it to maybe catch up on that retirement if they only had a few years left so that they can retire, collect a pension, and be done. But by and large, these folks do not want to come back in and serve. So what do we have to do?
I would say, and I would encourage anybody listening, if you're a former service member or even not, if you're a former public servant, I mean, file your paperwork. And for service members specifically, I would say file your DD 149 to your branch, which is Army, in my case, Army Board of Military Corrections, but there's an Air Force Board of Military Corrections. Print out a DD 149, get all your evidence in place and submit it to the board. Because here's my thing. Accountability. We need accountability. And if there's one place where we can centralize the evidence of the officers who knowingly broke the law, right? Knowingly broke the law, I would say you need to pull the records, the COVID-19 related records at these Board of Military Corrections, and we need to there needs to be a proper due process for officers who knowingly broke the law. I properly received due process. I didn't break a military regulation. I didn't break a federal law. I didn't, I didn't disobey the Constitution and my charge to defend it. However, that's what needs to happen. And also, if you're feeling compelled to serve again, right? Because this isn't about a career. It never has been. And if you think it's about a career, I would argue that's a complete and utter lie that's been implanted in your brain. You're a service member. You were a service member. You were there to serve. One of the privileges you get from a 20-year service is the ability to retire. And if you're feeling compelled to come back, even if you were voluntarily discharged because of the coercion and the craziness, or if you were involuntary discharge, the Air Force does have processes with local recruiters. For example, the Army put out an ops flash on 1 May and laying out step by step on what recruiters have to do when you go in and you say, hey, I was involuntary discharged because of the COVID-19 mandates, they have to code you as a COVID prior service. And they have a duty, these recruiters have a duty to process your paperwork, to get you a medical clearance, to send that up to determine your eligibility for re-entry in service. Now, I understand the grievances and the gripes one may have to go through another process. And I understand people, want an easier way, softer way, whatever the case is. I get it. But right now, the process might change, but that's the process. The process might change in the next month or so, due to them figuring this out. But right now, that's the process. And I would encourage people, if that's what you're feeling compelled to do, by all means, do it. Because at the end of the day, you're the individual we want in service. You're the individual that stood up for your oath of office, oath of enlistment.
Amen.
You're the individual that properly communicated with your chain of command. You didn't do anything wrong. You did nothing wrong. You did everything right. And that's for my own family, for my own kids. I want to be able to tell my kids, like, hey, yes, this happened. And these amazing individuals stood up, and some of them went back in. I'm not telling you to go back in. I'm not telling you not to go back in. But if that's what you're feeling compelled to do, get down on your knees, give it over to God, and send me, I'll go,
Amen. Very well said. And I absolutely want to reemphasize what you said about that. You are the kind of folks that we want serving, whether that's in uniform or in some other capacity, whether it's doing something in your community, volunteering, a volunteer firefighter, going to a shelter, going to a soup kitchen, whatever you're doing. We want you involved in your community. We want you doing something for this country, because you are who needs to be at the forefront of leading this nation back to what we've lost. You are that person. And let me switch gears with you really quick here, Mark. Here at Our Country, Our Choice, and on this podcast, we are focused on local. We are focused on the local community and how we can spur that grassroots movement and people to take back their communities in their towns, their cities. What are you doing right now? What are your goals for the future? What is something that you're focused on in your neck of the woods to maybe do something of that nature?
Local is huge, because that's everything. That's where it starts. We live in a nation where the executive, this central government, is limited and defined, and that's always what it's mandated to be. Now, it did get out of control. It did get bloated and belligerent, but we're all learning. And the biggest thing you can do is knowledge is power. So educate yourself, because when you tap into the knowledge, I call it God-given discernment, you're able to secure the power in which God has given to you, right? And when you do that, you can individually secure your unalienable rights at the local level, properly instructing your public servants, because they work for you. And you're the ultimate authority in a republic, by the people, for the people, we the people. So when you properly wield that power in a professional, legitimate, lawful manner, you're properly carrying out your duties. And when you carry out your duties at the local level, collectively, it secures the republic at the centralized level as well. And that's what I encourage people to do, is to gain the knowledge, to be able to secure your power, secure your individual unalienable rights, and then carry forth with properly instructing your public servants. And when we do that, when we each individually do that, because this isn't a group. We're not in a group. We're in a republic with individual unalienable rights. So if you're not doing that, you're not doing your responsibility, your civic duty as one of the people. And if you're a public servant and you're not adhering to your oath of office and securing the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, you're aiding and abetting foreign enemies. And so if you're actively doing that, I would say you cease and desist right now. And if you've already done that, well, we've got your names.
Amen. I love that. No, that's That's perfect. Hey, Mark, you're a personal hero of mine.
Likewise,
thank-
Sam.
Appreciate you, brother.
Teamwork.
Teamwork indeed. Thanks for coming on the show, man. I want to say to everybody out there, go back and watch this again and again and again and listen to what Mark said. You know, we have a civic duty as citizens, and that can't be abdicated. If you want change in this nation, if you want change in this country, it is incumbent on you to make that change. Do not rely on somebody at the Fed to do it for you, because it's simply not going to happen. Okay. Yeah. It takes action from all of us in our communities coming together and making that change. So once again, Mark, thank you so much. It's been an awesome show, and God bless, brother.
Thanks for having me. God bless.
Y'all take care.